Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I make an embroidery floss wrapped rope as a trim element to use in slow stitching. Now, by making this element ourselves, we create something unique, and it can coordinate using the colors and the textures that we like. Now, I'm using embroidery floss, but you can use any type of yarn that you like. What I like to do with this is wrap different colors together, and it gives a kind of a fun boho effect. At the end of the video, I'll show variations if you don't have rope or you don't like the feel of using rope to wrap your embroidery floss. It's a fun technique and it's very clever because it gives such texture to your work. You can just stitch it down using the couching stitch into your work. And the properties of rope make it interesting because you can coil it around or you can create different arcs and different techniques. It's a really fun project. So sometimes it's fun to make your own trim, your materials, from things you have on hand that's a little unexpected to use in your slow stitching. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I use just rope, and this is cotton rope because I prefer the cotton rope to anything like nylon or polyester, but use what you have. And you can make this wrapped rope that you can use in your slow stitching. Now you can tailor the rope, your little trim here, to go in your work. So if I wanted to add a little element to it that has not only texture, but some fun color, I would just cut off a length of rope and wrap it, and this is embroidery floss, and then I have my little pieces. It's a very simple procedure. You can use glue for fabric, or you can skip the glue altogether, and I'll show you how I create it. And at the end of the video, I'll show you some alternatives if you don't happen to have rope lying around, and just the results and how they vary from using the rope. So to start with, I just took a length of rope and I just cut off a piece. Now because the rope is wound into that format to store it, it does have a little bit of a bend to it, but it's cotton rope. And that's kind of the beauty of it because in my slow stitching, I can bend the piece into whatever shape I want as well. So that's one of the pros to using the rope. What I like to do is choose some colors of embroidery floss. And this takes a lot more embroidery floss than you would expect. You can use your fabric glue to start it, but you don't have to. I'm just using a needle, and I get a long needle with a small eye, but one that I can comfortably put all 6 strands of embroidery floss through. I start by just giving a quick design to my piece here, and I can just alternate colors. I can make it a single color, or I can use variegated thread just to get a different effect. So it's really very forgiving, and it's one of these things that you use up what you have in your stash. So I have these 3 colors of embroidery floss here. I just love the blue, so that's what I'm going to use today. So I take my length, and this is a pretty good length, maybe a yard, and I'm just going to open it up so that I make sure there are no knots. And then I start at the end here, not at the very end, because I always trim some of this off as I'm going to use it, unless I want to keep it to use with the exposed rope showing. But I just fold down maybe a couple of inches that embroidery floss to keep on the end here. So I fold it over itself. Then I hold it down, so I have kind of a loop at the end, and all I really want is for it to lay flush eventually with my rope. And then from here, I'm just going to start twisting. And I twist the embroidery floss over and over, and I'll just flip it around because it's easier for me this way. And I'm locking in that original loop. I can pull it taut, or I can leave it. I'm not looking for a totally neat effect, although I can get one this way. And then I'll just start going back over the layer I've put down. And I'll continue this wrapping my rope. It's time consuming, but it's very simple. So I'm just continuing to wrap it. Now I can stop when I run out of thread, or I can stop when I feel like I have enough on this rope that I'm happy with the way it looks. I'm going to use whatever I have, and I like to end with about 4 to 6 inches left off of the rope, unwound. So I've wrapped the loop. I can go back in and move it around any of the thread that I've wrapped around just to cover that rope completely. And then at the end, I just take my thread and I'll run it through that needle, the eye of that needle. This is why I like to use a larger eye for the needle. And then I can just thread my needle through a good portion of the area I've already wrapped, and I pull the thread out, and now it's secure. I like to go over it a few times, meaning I just thread my needle underneath the areas I've already wrapped, and I come out, and then I'll do the same thing going backwards. You can just do as much as it makes you feel secure that your wrapping isn't going to come undone. I don't want to pull it too taut, but I just want to feed that needle through so that I have a good portion all covered, and now it's locked into place. I'll snip the end and I have my first color. Now, I didn't have to needle through it all to lock it into place. I could have started wrapping over the end. I personally like to keep it locked into place for each color, but that's just me. And I'll show you what I mean with the next one. I'll use these two smaller strands of this blue. Now, if you're using fabric glue, you'd put a little fabric glue on at this point, and again, you'd put your loop down, or at least one strand down, and then you'd start wrapping. I'm just going to start wrapping with that strand down. So I start wrapping right up against the edge, and then I'm wrapping over that loop that I put down. In this case, it's just a single strand. And I'll keep wrapping until I have, again, 4 to 6 inches at the end. I can even go a little less because I'm not going to take a needle to the end. So I just keep going around. If there's any spots that I've missed, I can pull it back and really keep it into place. Turn it around again and continue wrapping. And then when I have about 2 to 3 inches at the end, I can either put just a single knot where I go around and knot through, and I only do a single one because I'm not really looking for bulk here. I'm just using a quick little way to lock it into position. And then I can hold it down here. I'll take my other thread, which happens to be in the same color, open that up, feed that so I have another tail there, and I start wrapping it again. So those are 2 ways you can finish it off if you're continuing to wrap it with more color. So again, I'll just finish wrapping it with this. And because I'm switching colors, I like to take a needle and add a few stitches to hold it in place. But I am going to add one more color at the end, so it's not necessary. I can continue to wrap it over, just like I showed you. So I'll wrap this one, I'll wrap the next color, and then I'll show you one more time how I end off this wrapped rope. So there, I've wrapped the end of my strand. I have about 6 inches or so left, and I threaded it on a needle. So from here, I'm just going to stitch back through parts of where I've already wrapped, and I pull that taut. And I'll just do that a few times, stitching through just the wrapping. Because it's a cotton rope, you can stitch through the rope if you wanted to, but I don't find that necessary. I just stitch back and forth a few times, and that's enough to hold everything in place. So from there, I'll just trim it down, and I can trim down my rope as well. And I have another wrapped rope. So now I want to show you some variations. If you don't want to use rope, either you don't have it or you don't like the feel of it. So I found some straws and I wrapped them. It's a very much of a harder effect, but it gives you more dimension. This is a jumbo straw, but you can do the same thing with a smaller straw. I just cut back just so that the floss doesn't let the straw peek through. It gives you a nice bead, and it's an interesting effect. It's not one that I really care for, but I'm sure it has its uses. You can also do the same thing with a pipe cleaner. With a pipe cleaner, because that pipe cleaner or Chanel stem, depending on where you are, has a little give to it, you can really compress it depending on how tight you do your wrapping. And here I wrapped it with some variegated yarn, some thin variegated yarn, and then I did another row of wrapping it with just some silvery thread. So it's a pretty effect. And like the rope, I can bend it, unlike the straw. And lastly, I found this tubing. It was sold at the Dollar Tree. This one happens to be jute, but it comes in all different colors. It'll be metallic. I didn't realize this, but it actually moves around, which is an interesting effect in itself. But you can pull it taut as well. And when you wrap it, it does compress. And so you can get a different effect this way, and it does have a little bit of give. So there are many things you can use if you don't have rope handy. So that's how I use embroidery floss to create these interesting wrapped ropes, as well as using other items like pipe cleaners and different jute and stuff like that. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.